Richardson, and this is The Underground. On today's program, we're going to discuss Bible prophecy and the return of Jesus. Now, for some reason, these are two issues that the church continually seems to approach in an unbalanced or unbiblical manner. It seems as though we always take one extreme approach or the other. You have large sections of the church who almost obsess over the end times, being really overly fixated on these things. And then you have large segments of the church that essentially neglect them altogether. Now, on today's program, we want to discuss how to approach these issues in a healthy, responsible, biblically balanced manner after the teachings of Jesus and the apostles. We want to form our approach and our emphasis on the teachings of Jesus and the New Testament. This one thing is certain. The church must return to a focus and an emphasis on the return of Jesus. Overwhelmingly, throughout the scriptures, this issue is the primary focal point of longing and hope. It says in Titus 2, verses 11 through 13, that the return of Jesus is the blessed hope for Christians, for believers. What that means is this, is that whether we're discussing the expectations, the hope, the longing, and the yearning of the biblical prophets, of John the Baptist, of Jesus, of the apostles, of the early church, it is the return of Jesus that is the central focal point of all biblical expectation and hope. Yet again, so much of the church today is neglecting this matter. They will give lip service to it, saying they believe in the return of Jesus, but by and large pay very little attention to it and discuss it far less frequently than it's discussed throughout the New Testament. Now, this hope, the hope of the return of Jesus, this is not merely the hope of Christians. It's not merely the hope for believers, but the scriptures actually say that it is the hope of all creation. So in Romans 8, verses 21 through 24, it actually says that the creation itself will be set free from its present slavery, its bondage to corruption. And it says that we know that the whole creation groans, it's groaning, it's yearning to be set free from the present state where it's enduring the pains of childbirth. So literally everything that God has created is yearning for that day when Jesus returns and restores the entire created order back to its originally intended purpose. Not only that, but Romans 8 goes on to explain that we also, who have the Holy Spirit in us, because we have the Spirit of God in us, we also are groaning and yearning and crying out in expectation of the day of the return of Jesus. Okay, now, what about Bible prophecy? This term, Bible prophecy, is a term that's very popular, again, in some segments of the church. And when we say Bible prophecy, I'm talking about groups gather together, they have conferences, they say, what's coming next and this sort of thing. And I myself am considered a Bible prophecy teacher. Now, here's the thing. The way that I personally approach the issue of Bible prophecy of the end times, the last days. So I break it up into three different components or three different segments. The first component I refer to as the events that precede the coming of Jesus. So these are the events such as the wars throughout the earth, throughout the Middle East, issues such as the Antichrist, the Great Tribulation, the Mark of the Beast, all of these things. These are the issues that precede the coming of Jesus. And then you have the actual return of Jesus. Again, this falls into the category of the end times. And then you have the events that follow his return. And so you have the events that come before his return, his actual return, and then the events that come after his return, the actual kingdom that he will establish here on the earth. Again, biblical hope, that which we're all expecting and longing for and yearning for. And the way that I explain it is this, is that if we are primarily focused on the events that precede his return, and we don't have our primary focus on his return and the events that follow his return, then we will become unbalanced, unhealthy, and maybe even very strange individuals. The Lord wants our overwhelming focus to be on Jesus, his return, and the kingdom that he will establish. Now, to be clear, the Lord does want us to pay attention to the events that precede his coming. And in fact, I would say that many in the church today approach the issue of the end times, Bible prophecy, in an unbalanced and really unbiblical manner. You'll frequently hear statements made by leaders in the church. They'll say that if we are studying the signs of the times, if we're trying to relate events that are taking place in the earth to biblical prophecy, the testimony of the biblical prophets, they'll say that this is a distraction, it's unbalanced, it's unhealthy, this sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is that Jesus expects his followers to understand the signs of the times, the events that are unfolding in the earth as they relate to the testimony of the biblical prophets. So in Matthew 16, verses 1 through 3, Jesus is encountering a group of Pharisees and Sadducees of his day, and it says this. It says, the Pharisees and the Sadducees came up to him, and they were testing Jesus, and they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. And then he says this. He says, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening. And then he says, do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times? And the point is this. He was rebuking them. He goes, listen, you know how to interpret the signs out there in the weather. You know how to interpret the evening sky. He says, but you don't know how to interpret the evening news. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that everything that takes place in the earth is related to Bible prophecy. But if Jesus rebuked the Pharisees and the Sadducees for not knowing the signs of the times, then how much more should we, as followers of Jesus, how much more are we expected to know and discern the signs that are unfolding in the earth as they relate to biblical prophecy? Jesus expects us to know the signs of the times. Now again, it is not our primary focus. Jesus, his return has to be the primary focus. But nevertheless, he does expect us to know those signs. That is a biblically balanced approach. That is an approach that respects the teachings, the commandments, and the expectations of Jesus. Amazingly, Jesus even relates Israel's having missed him as the Messiah to their failure to understand and interpret properly the signs of the biblical prophets. So in Luke 19, verses 41 through 44, Jesus said this. It says that when he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city. He wept over it, saying, if you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace. He's lamenting. He says, but now they have been hidden from your eyes, for the days will come when your enemies will throw up a barricade against you. They will surround you, hem you in on every side, and they will level you to the ground. So he's speaking of the events, first and foremost of 70 AD, when Jerusalem and the temple would be destroyed. And then he says they will level you to the ground and your children within you. They will not leave in you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation. That when the Messiah came in fulfillment of all of the biblical prophets, they were blinded to that fact. They had not been paying attention to the spirit and the word of the biblical prophets. And as a result of that, the judgment of God, the chastisement of their God actually fell on the nation. Then there are those that many people will call the Bible prophecy nuts. And I'm sure that I've been accused of being a Bible prophecy nut myself. Now again, if we only focus on the events that precede his coming, we can also become puffed up. And what do I mean by that? Well, in 1 Corinthians 8, verses 1 through 3, Paul says this. He says, knowledge makes arrogant, Knowledge can make you arrogant. It doesn't always make you arrogant, but knowledge most certainly can make you proud and arrogant. On the other hand, Paul says, but love edifies. And I love this statement. If anyone thinks that he knows anything, he has not yet known as he ought to know. And then he says, but if anyone loves God, then he is known by him. The Father knows those that love him, and the Father knows everyone. But the point is this. Paul says, listen, love is far more important than having all sorts of secret revelatory understanding of the timeline of the end times. It's possible, if you're paying attention to Bible prophecy and the signs of the times too much, that you can almost enter into a form of Gnosticism. You think you have the secret information, the secret revelation that the rest of the church doesn't have. You can become arrogant and unloving toward the rest of the church, that maybe they don't have the time or the energy to pay attention to these things in the same way that you do. Maybe a lot of mothers in the church that have small children, maybe they don't like to pay attention to the wars and the mark of the beast and the Antichrist and all of these things. So for those that are paying attention to Bible prophecy, you have to be so careful to recognize that far more important than knowledge and understanding is love. And this is the goal and the purpose of understanding the signs of the times, which is to prepare our hearts to endure those days and encourage and lead many to righteousness during that time. We must also remember that for now, in this present age, no matter how much we study, no matter how much we meditate, we will always see, at the very best, in part. 1 Corinthians 13:12 says this, and this is another essential component of approaching Bible prophecy, the end times, in a healthy, balanced, loving manner. Paul says this, now, at this present time, we see in a mirror dimly. Some translations say through a glass darkly. But then we shall see face to face. Again, no matter how much revelation you believe that you have, no matter how much time you've put into studying the scriptures, no matter how much you feel as though the Lord has opened up to you, on this side of eternity, at this present time, in this age, the best that we will see is dimly, is partially. So we need to approach the issue of the end times, recognizing the fact that we don't have it all together, that we will all be wrong in the end. The Lord's ultimate purpose with the end times, it's to humble everyone. And so if you think you have it all together now, the Lord will humble you. I will get things wrong. You will get things wrong. Let's approach the issue of the end times from a position of humility, because pride is blindness. And if we have a humble attitude, the Lord will bless that, and He will open up further revelation to us. This is an essential biblical principle. Beyond all of these things,